in your value proposition relationships webinar. I'm Joshua Amos, the facility management consultants council liaison. I apologize, but tongue-tied there. Okay, next screen, Daniel. I do want to let everyone know they have been muted for audio quality. If you do have any questions during the webinar, I do encourage you to type them into the chat box, and I will feed them to our host during the presentation. Okay, next slide, please. And I do want to let everybody know about some of the value propositions that the FMCC does have for you, such as Ask the Expert, Find a Consultant, Locate a Speaker, and online resources. You can access those at fmcc.ifma.org. Okay, Daniel, next slide. And of course, I do always want to thank our sponsors for sponsoring the FMCC. Next slide, please. Okay, and before I turn it over, I do want to let you know our speaker today is Daniel Goldsmith, Principal of Daniel M. Goldsmith Consultancy, LLC. Practice areas are strategy, organizational development, training, and research. He is an adjunct faculty at Strayer University. He has extensive experience as a practicing facility manager in the public sector. In industry designation is Real Property Administrator. Okay, I want to go ahead and turn it over to Daniel for the presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Joshua, for the introduction, and thank you as well to IFMA and the Facility Management Consultants Council. Just as a brief addendum to the bio, that was intro that was provided by Joshua. Also, I'm associated with several professional organizations, namely the esteemed International Facility Management Association, IFMA, also the Institute of Management Consultants, the Society of Human Resources Management, and the American Statistical Association. So today we will be considering strengthening our value proposition. With respect to value proposition, we want to focus on relationships. So in that regard, we've identified the following learning objectives, and they are noted as follows. One, we will be considering the notion of strategic alliances. We'll be also identifying and considering the significance of strategic collaborations. We'll look at and consider the imperative of relationships in business, and we'll consider the dimension of relationship as it relates to collaborations. We'll also identify the impact that collaborative relationship has on our clients, as well as the impact with respect to our stakeholders. And of course, we look at value proposition in and of itself as it exists with collaboration. And then finally, we will look at value proposition in terms of how it can be strengthened with and through effective collaboration. So getting started, I want to just lay down some parameters of context just to ensure that we have some clarity with respect to our discussion. Number one, the discussion is directed obviously to the consulting community of practice. And this discussion assumes that professional collaborations have occurred or they currently exist. So this should be something familiar to each of us, and the realities associated with those collaborations. And as a result, we'll speak to the dynamic of collaborations among us as practitioners, as well as among organizations, our respective organizations. So when we talk about strategic alliances, as the slide connotes, it really speaks to a certain excitement and enthusiasm, as well as uncertainty and just pure questions. And I've chosen the term strategic and alliance specifically. While they do have broad interpretation, I wanted to make sure we considered them because the relationships that we have as facility management consultants or consultants in general are strategic in that they are inherently valuable and critical in terms of skill and capacity. So as the image connotes, there are definitely some realities to consider, particularly when we realize that a strategic relationship or alliance is about to be formed. and advanced into an engagement, that's a really prime opportunity to be excited. And the reasons driving that excitement is because, number one, it's an opportunity to excel. It's an opportunity to learn. As consultants, we are engaged in continuous learning and exploration, but here, when we do the work, there are things that we're likely to explore and discover that we don't know, or we'll discover things that will deepen our perspective and deepen our awareness and sensitivity with respect to what we do. And throughout that excitement, needless to say, comes some uncertainty. These are the questions that are reflected in the slide. And so we have the issues of uncertainty. We have the issues of risk. There's the issues of what awaits me here in this engagement that I might not be able to respond to as I like. Where are the likely blind spots likely to exist? So as we mentioned earlier in this particular slide around the realities for consideration, there is the reality of possibility and certainly the reality of sustainable business performance, and there is the reality of creating and advancing competitive advantage. So the first example that I wanted to just draw our attention to, although we'll move beyond the slides here, but I just thought it would be good to really create a framework of understanding around successful strategic alliances. And I thought I'd identify 4 companies that are very well known and are very renowned in their brand. On the upper left-hand side of your screen, you'll see the image reflecting an iPod device by Apple, and then you'll also see a chip by Nike. And that really highlights the collaboration and strategic alliance where Nike and Apple have come together to really energize one's exercise experience. Most times if you go to the gym or if you choose to go jogging along the cityscape, most people will have their earbuds in and they're listening to music to just sort of keep their rhythm with respect to their workout and their exercise. Well, the beauty about this device with the Nike insert, which goes into your sneaker, is that it tracks very critical information about calories burned, distance traveled, as well as the time that has been consumed on your exercise experience. And so consequently, you have Apple and Nike who have come together, each with their own individual strengths, and they have created a very unique experience to the consumer. On the second example I would identify would be Barnes & Noble, bookstores, and Starbucks. And here again, you have 2 companies that have very strong brand presences in the marketplace. And primarily when you think about Barnes & Noble in a bookstore, you see people reading and just sitting in comfortable chairs. And what you see is that this experience of discovery and escape afforded uniquely to the opportunity and engagement of book reading is very much present. And that experience is complemented by a Starbucks coffee or a hot chocolate or a frappuccino or whatever beverage that particularly appeals to you. So as we note on the next slide, which is the basis for the business alliances, and this is certainly reflected in the previous example around Nike and Apple as well as Barnes & Noble and Starbucks, is that there's the opportunity for increased profitability. There's clearly the opportunity for increased visibility. You have the opportunity to create better value to the customer, more so as a collaborative effort than it would be as you stood alone in that particular venture. You also have the ability to deliver greater capacity to the customer. You have the opportunity to improve your competitive standing, your competitive performance, and you get to advance the presence of your brand and improve the brand recognition. So as we look at the business alliances, things that are considered oftentimes for those that we are likely to consider collaboration with are things such as our compatibility. And this was certainly the case in the examples that I showed earlier. But for us as consultants, this certainly does resonate with some relevance and truth. And that is there has to be compatibility in business strategy. There has to be a compatibility in business capability. There has to be a compatibility in expertise and skills. And obviously the recognition has to be mutually beneficial. So consequently, we begin to see this nexus here between the alliances and the collaborations. And you begin to really see very clearly emerging from the reality of the collaboration the phenomenon of commonalities, that we do have compatibilities, whether they be in skills, whether they be in interests, whether it be in particular clients. We do have synergies. We have the ability to come together and bring our skills and our respective levels of expertise to bear on a service in such a way that is extremely beneficial to the client as well as beneficial to us. And of course, you have the opportunity to build a relationship. So with this slide, this just kind of reflects some of the busyness and the dynamic, some of the tension associated with collaboration. Obviously, you're always concerned about the skills, but also you're also concerned about things such as the planning, the outcome, the expectations. You're concerned about negotiations. You're talking about critical discussion and critical conversation. And these are all very good elements to experience, because it goes to show you that we're in the business now of doing business, and we're in the business of actually seeing outcomes materialize. So with that said, given the significance of the collaboration and strategic alliance, Harvard Business Review, there was an article written by Jonathan Hughes and Jeff Wise that spoke to the reality of strategic alliances and strategic relationships. And one of the things that it noted is that alliances among businesses increase annually by 25%. So that in and of itself suggests that companies and practitioners are drawn to the notion of alliance and collaboration. But in the same article with respect to the Harvard Business Review, the authors note that while collaborations account for 33% of company revenue and value, 60 to 70% of those collaborations fail, which I thought was very interesting. So on one hand, we have a driving imperative that says there is a benefit and a value to collaborate. But in the process of undertaking these collaborations, the failure rate really begins to question the wisdom of some of the ventures or the undertakings that were advanced. So this is where our discussion really begins to take traction. So when we look at these collaborations, I believe it's very important for us to be very mindful of what our value proposition is. You know, what is it that we bring to the transaction of an engagement and a collaboration? And so the value proposition is generally refers to those features or those attributes or those qualities that draws the client to you. So from where we sit here as consultants, obviously it would an attribute that would draw a very high level of consideration would be skills, our expertise. It also begs the question of how responsive we are. How responsible are we? Can our business transactions be trusted? You know, are we honest in how we do the business? Are we honest with the people with whom we collaborate? And do we engage with the client and the stakeholders timely? Do we respond promptly to any concerns that arise? Are we sensitive to the notion of perceptions or misperceptions and how we try to reconcile those with the realities? It also speaks to our integrity as professionals, our ethics, and our service. And what I really find very interesting and as a very critical feature is the experience we provide our clients. After we've done a good job, after we've provided the deliverable, how does the client feel? Do they feel like it's been a real benefit to them to do business with us, to know us? Or is there some hesitation or some indifference with respect to how they perceive the value that we provide? So this leads to the question of our trust quotient and our ability to be trusted. And, you know, we talk about things that build trust, like the skill, the character, the consistency, but more fundamentally, it really comes down to some of the smaller details around, for instance, follow through. Do we take the opportunity to check in with the client, just even on an impromptu basis, as a means of just making sure that things that were promised were actually delivered, and that the outcome of those deliverables is indeed offering the benefit that was expected when the work was completed. It also requires us to ask the very difficult question, as uncomfortable as it may be, or as awkward as it may be. But if behind the difficult question is the assumption that there is an unresolved issue. And if it is, therein speaks to the sensitivity that you exhibit to connecting with that client where they are, and where the particular sense of sensitivity as it relates to the product and service provided. It comes down to follow-up. It comes down to just exercising sensitivity not only to the client but also their stakeholders. You know, how does the service we provide affect the people the client deals with, or those entities? So this comes down to our ability to trust and be trusted, and it really is very telling about our trust and the ability to be trusted. As with any relationship, there are challenges, and this goes back down to trust, communication, and conflict. And we did speak about perception in the previous slide, but one other point I'd like to highlight is, what does our behavior within the relationship say about how we feel about the relationship? We all have experiences where we've dealt with clients who were more challenging than others to interact with. But do we remain constant and vigilant in our professionalism, in our sensitivity, and our commitment to deliver excellence to the client? In short, does our behavior reflect the leadership that's necessary to secure the confidence of the client? So this then begins to push us further into a level of consideration with respect to our collaborators, because while we are, as practitioners, are mindful of the sensitivities to the clients and the like, we also need to be sure that our collaborators reflect those same sensitivities. And so this begs the question of how well do we know our collaborators? And this really has to be an exchange of information, not an exchange of assumption, but it really has to be about how well do you know your collaborator versus what you assume you know. And vice versa, how well do your collaborators know you versus what they actually assume they know? And how then do we get to that pursuit of knowledge? So I want to propose a couple of areas around for us to consider potential knowledge points. Number one, there's oftentimes a presumption of skill. We generally know and are very comfortable with the hard skill sets associated with our collaborators. But what about the soft skills? The soft skills such as friendliness, warmth, cordiality, kindness, empathy. Those things or those attitudes, those behaviors that facilitate a connectedness with the client. What about the values? So we know where we stand on skills, but how does our collaborators feel about certain things, like honesty? When it's time to pull your proposal together and deliver it to the client, is there a candor and a forthrightness there that allows us to, one, be very transparent in our diligence, but also ensure that the client is getting the product and service to which we've been entrusted to deliver? How proactive are we? How willing are we to acknowledge error? And unfortunately, error is a phenomenon and reality of life. That's one of the main reasons pencils have erasers, because errors are likely to occur. But when it comes to us as professionals, how are we dealing with that, and how quickly are we willing to remedy that error? And then what is our passion to desire? What is our passion to deliver win-win solutions? A win for us, a win for the collaborator, and a win for the client. Work ethics, diligence, the due diligence, thoroughness, tenacity, and perseverance. Meeting those deadlines that have been committed to, and all of a sudden you have had certain changes to occur within the engagement that require much longer hours than needed, or much more longer hours than were originally expected and planned for. Are you willing to go that extra mile? Are you really willing to forego or make those sacrifices necessary to ensure that you uphold the commitments that was made? With respect to transparency, are we willing to minimize assumption, and are we very vocal about it? Do we advocate full disclosure? Do we work to minimize surprises? And then if we are looking at our individual styles, are we clear on what those styles look like? Are we clear on whether one person may be more of an introvert and one more of an extrovert, and how does that really work out? And then obviously cooperation. Do we demonstrate an ability to work together? And do we demonstrate an ability to accept and follow direction, which can be a little difficult for those of us who assume responsibility for our professional destinies. So those of us who, are entrepreneurs and make the investments and go out and get the engagement, secure the business, oftentimes our roles in the engagement may take a different tenor than what we're accustomed to. But are we able to adapt and ensure that we're able to collaborate appropriately? And then, of course, the roles and responsibilities, can they be respected? And are all those responsibilities clear and aligned? These types of questions help us get to learn and understand about ourselves as well as our collaborators, and we can in turn then begin to work in a way that creates a very positive environment around transparency, around credibility, around dependability, reliability, you're very comfortable with your preparation. So you consequently you're very comfortable with the deliverables that are ready for delivery. The level of presumption is at a minimum. You are very much aware of your stakeholders with respect to your community of stakeholders, and you're very much aware of what their level of engagement is. And you also become more aware of the stakeholder awareness with respect to your client, if necessary and appropriate. And of course, you have the ability now to really advocate and defend your collaboration by looking after them, their best interests as well as yours. I often like to just call that fiduciary level of responsibility, that trust, that ability to make sure the well-being of your collaborators is preserved and protected. On the next slide, we talk about some of the relationship considerations evolving from the collaboration. That is, it's a good form of marketing. Now, I know marketing oftentimes is presented in such a way where it's designed to create demand and business and attention to yourselves. But one of the things that can do wonders for you as a consultant is that the way you engage on the consulting assignment and the way your collaborators work with you oftentimes is very telling to the client. Customer and client experience oftentimes can be the catalyst for repeat business. You know, obviously when you're working together, you have this whole capacity to create solutions that matter. They are well-timed, they're appropriate, and they fit. And that is the result of an effort that shows consideration, that shows preparation, and it shows sensitivity to our collaborators as well as our client. So just for the sake of just some consideration, internal reflection, I think it's appropriate for us to evaluate why our relationships are so important. So I think oftentimes relationships are often presumed upon because we have relationships on so many levels. But really and seriously, why are our relationships important? Well, I mean, what are those drivers? Well, I can tell you, for one, we need relationships for our survival. We need them for one, socially, we need them. Personally, interpersonally, we need them. And in business, they're critical. And I have often gone to the point where I have emphasized the point where relationships is really considered a valuable currency. Because as you know, and if you have worked around long enough, what you know is one thing, but who you know is what is able to really make the difference. Where you have had the positive experiences and where people have had the positive experience for you oftentimes can translate into opportunities and other opportunities to just engage professionally. Relationships allow us to learn. It helps us to learn what we don't know, or maybe what we're not even completely clear about. It allows us to grow, and it allows us to grow and develop professionally. So, from a candid conversation standpoint, the question I ask you to consider is, what type of collaborator are you? And what type of a collaborator would your collaborators say you are? Would they say you're an asset or liability to the transaction? How would you make that determination? Are you an asset or a liability to the transaction? Are you an asset or liability to the process of the work itself? And what would your collaborators say? Do you advance the well-being of your collaborator? So with that said, I ask you on another level, what is your criteria for relationships? What influences you to create or build a collaborative relationship? What are your motivations to create or build a collaborative relationship? And how do you know it's working? How do you know it's effective? How do you know it's a win-win? And oftentimes we can feel, quote unquote, that the relationship is working, but are we being a bit presumptuous with that? Sometimes a candid conversation with your collaborators or a check-in can be quite revealing and quite informative in terms of how well the relationship is working. So as we conclude this discussion before we go into the questions, I'd like for you to consider just the opportunities that await you with respect to building your relationships. And one of the questions I'd like to leave you with is, what will you do to nurture and strengthen your professional relationships? When was the last time you sent a thank you note? Now, in this age of email, thank you notes have become almost a practice of the past, and it was very much considered a social grace in decades past. But it's something to be said in this day and age where technology and email is so readily available with iPads and iPhones, or smartphones, if you will, where you can instantly communicate with someone. It's something to be said for a handwritten note, and that's mailed or even passed along, that just says, thank you, I appreciate the opportunity to have worked with you, I appreciate the opportunity to have learned and explored and discovered these professional endeavors with you. I'd be interested in knowing what opportunities have you identified that will help you advance your relationships holistically. I'd be interested in knowing what collaborative relationships that might have been strained due to a misstep. And I think that's just something we need to be very candid about with ourselves. And if there has been a relationship that has endured the stress of a misstep or even an indiscretion, how can that relationship be repaired? How can it be restored? And what will be your role in the repair and restoration of that relationship? These are the considerations that I'd like to leave you with as we conclude our discussion here before questions. Just for your information, I'd like to make you aware of the source that I reviewed in preparing this discussion. It is from the Harvard Business Review, and you can access that article at www.hbr.org, and you will be able to download the article for your review, or just keep it in your library for future reference. So at this time, I invite questions, comments, observations, concerns from the audience.
Great, thank you, Daniel. I do have a question for you. It says, on commercial terms, can you provide any insight on win-win financial terms? For example, revenue sharing, profit sharing, etc., potential landmines in this area.
Well, what comes to mind with that question, I think, is that there really has to be some clarity around expectation. And I think there needs to be some clarity about what's realistic to be pursuing. I think oftentimes when financial considerations are being identified for potential engagement, I've often perceived that not enough attention is given to what the costs are likely to be incurred internally. I'll often perceive that not enough consideration has been given to the process, or to the engagement, or to the outcomes. And if you're pricing services off of mistaken notions, I think invariably there will be some confusion and potential conflict around some of those financial considerations. So I would just say be very clear, not to be cliche, but I think you really need to be clear on what you're clear about. If you don't leave assumptions on the table, and you know, I often felt that the only stupid question is the one you just don't ask. And if it is a stupid question, or if it's perceived as stupid, you know, then that might be telling of another issue that may warrant some consideration. But I think you just need to know what your parameters are in terms of doing business, and you need to be very clear about what you can be willing to accept and what you clearly cannot consider in terms of doing business. Because while we do need the business, the whole purpose of being in business is to make money. And each of us as practitioners knows what that looks like for us and our respective practices and organizations. So I think a candid conversation around that particular issue is critical.
Great. I have another question. It's business relationships often start with much optimism, but rarely look or write into the contract the exit terms of the business. Any suggestions here?
Could you just repeat that last portion of that? I read about, I understood the first part. I just want to make sure I was clear on the latter part of that question.
Sure. It's writing in the exit terms of the business, of the contract, I suppose.
So basically, if you're in the contract and it starts off on a good note and you're looking at the conditions of exit, am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
So again, that would go back to having a candid conversation before you sign the contract. And that just means really sitting down and having the candid conversation. Now, keep in mind, it's appropriate to, to consult with your counsel to ensure that the language is consistent and appropriate for you, and is legally appropriate. But before I would commit to a signature on a contract document, this is where you really have to review the contract language thoroughly and make sure that it's something that you can live with. And if it's not, you really just have to have a candid conversation. And if that can't be had, then again, you might need to reconsider some things. I would certainly suggest making sure you consult with your counsel. If there are issues with respect to the conditions of exit, or if there are penalties, that are likely to be excised as a result of a premature exit, I think you just really need to flesh that out, literally flesh that out. I would just be very hesitant to commit to a signature. Excuse me. I would be very reluctant to commit to a signature on a contract if there were any language details that where I just was not comfortable. And I do understand about the whole exit dimension of contract arrangements. But keep in mind, you're on the hook legally for these. So I just think it would just behoove you to sit down with the other party of the contract and be clear. They need to be, one, clear about what you want. And that clarity has to be mutual. And if you can't agree in principle when a face-to-face discussion, that could be very indicative that a contract would be very difficult to forge. At least one of that would be that would give you the level of comfort that you would seek in a collaboration.
Excellent. We have another question saying, are there any telltale signs towards a deteriorating relationship that you should be looking for?
Well, I've always advocated that it's one thing to pay attention to what is being spoken and what's being verbalized. I think it's more critical to pay attention to what's not being spoken and what's not being verbalized. I think behavior says a lot. Now, that's not to suggest for a moment that you see a behavior pattern that conflicts against the verbal sentiment that may have already been expressed. But if there is a discrepancy, or if there is a variation between the two, I think a candid conversation is appropriate. And it can be couched in terms of, like, when we were, working through this particular activity, I noticed that your response to a particular stimuli or stimulus or action was this. And I noticed it. I was just curious what prompted that. I mean, I think there are ways you can certainly go about ascertaining in more detail where a person is with respect to their thought around certain things and behavior. But clearly, you need to just not assume that it's all good. If you sense something, or more specifically, if you observe it, I don't want to just limit it to perception, because that's a very dangerous thing sometimes. But if someone runs a red light, they run a red light. It's indisputable. So if there's a behavior that you have observed that's fairly demonstrative and indisputable, and you don't agree with it, then I think it's incumbent upon you to just follow up as thoughtfully, as professionally, and as deferentially as you can to be clear on actually what was happening. And then ask them if they were aware of how this behavior could have come across. This could be an opportunity where this person may have been operating in a blind spot and didn't know it. So what I would suggest is that communication again. So let me just say this. These are not easy conversations to have. These take quite a bit of courage and quite a bit of conviction. And so, as you well know, being in business is just not for the faint of heart. And obviously, having viable, thriving professional relationships tend to be a bit trying, for lack of a better way to say it. But that's just part of the dynamic of the relationship. But you have a responsibility to be truthful to yourself and truthful to that professional relationship that you have. And if there is something amiss, you really have a responsibility to reach out and connect, even if it's over a cup of coffee, very casual, very informal, but a candid conversation needs to happen in a way that promotes goodwill, that promotes disclosure, and that promotes discovery, and that will promote a good path forward once the conversation has concluded.
Great. Well, we have a few more questions here. Do you have any best practices relating to the balancing of project work and client relations and/or communications?
Balance, can you kind of unpack the balance piece? I know it's kind of difficult to say. Balance between the client work, the relationship, and the communication. Am I understanding that correctly?
I believe so, yes.
I would say this is an opportunity. So when you have the collaboration, that in and of itself suggests there is some engagement that's occurring. Now, I know given with the technology, there are opportunities where people can work virtually. So the so-called FaceTime phenomenon may be can be virtual and not necessarily actual. But again, what I would say is I think it's appropriate to to meet regularly with your collaborators to discuss the issues, not only of the engagement, to have the check-in around the project, around the relationship, around the process, around the outcome, around the communication. That's just what I have known. And you know, one of the things, even when you notice on some of the methodologies that are advanced, such as like ISO, some of the major underpinnings behind this, although not explicitly stated, is that of communication. You know, if you have a quality practice or a quality standard, how does that translate to a quality deliverable? And there has to be some dialogue in terms of how that is framed and how it's presented. So I would just certainly say at the beginning of the engagement, be very clear on setting up some opportunity, or creating some opportunities routinely within the engagement to see how the project is going, and making sure that you make that time. The other thing I was just thinking about as I was speaking, you know, it's appropriate to really kind of have some ground rules too, if you really feel that there's likely to be some challenges around the balancing of the work, the communication in the project, the relationship. I think it's appropriate to just, before you get started, kind of create a charter. You know, this is what we're doing. This is how we're going to proceed. This is why we exist, and this is what we hope to accomplish, and this is how we hope to do it. You know, it kind of, you know, formalizes it, it articulates it, and it gives you a bit of a roadmap and a frame of reference for as we go. Now, one of the good things I like about being, you know, professionals is that it's not like a scorecard that you're keeping. You know, I like to think when we're dealing with professional exchange, that we're talking about, okay, you know, let's have this check-in. So I think it's good to certainly have the formal ground rules. You know, if you feel that, you know, the balance and everything is going to be a bit of a challenge, but I wouldn't make it so formal that you don't have room to breathe and be spontaneous and impromptu with the relational piece. You want to make sure that it is able to breathe and thrive. And that would be my response to that question.
Okay, excellent. This one's kind of a comment, but I think it's also sort of a question. It says, in-house strategic alliances with a complementary firm can also create a strategic advantage. What's your opinion on that?
I think it's true, and I think that strategic advantage depends largely on the parties within that alliance. You know, it just kind of depends. You know, if you have two chefs, you know, and they're both proficient, you know, the fruit of those collaborations would largely depend on what's being brought to that collaboration. So I do believe that that is very true.
Great. And then our final question is, which tools and methods do you recommend to search for new relationships and partners?
Well, I think tools and resources to search for new business partners. Is that correct?
Tools and methods. Tools and methods do you recommend?
offhand, that's very difficult to kind of just say, because the way I have often ventured about my relationships oftentimes have been driven around need. I think it's appropriate to certainly network. I think it's appropriate to be known by others as well as get known. And I think in that process, you will create opportunities to get to know people and get to know their skills. You get to know what their working styles are like. I certainly think an organization like IFMA certainly promotes that. You have a number of councils within IFMA that are not only unique to particular special interest areas, but the one thing we all have in common is that of facilities. And I think, you know, if someone is working in the corporate real estate council and you have someone else who's working in the council for academic institutions, I don't think that's a deal breaker to go beyond that boundary of the council, because you have a common interest that's bigger than your council in and of itself. I'm just using that as a for instance, but I do believe engaging with professional associations. I also think as an opportunity to engage and contribute in associations, whether it be your Chamber of Commerce or something comparable to that. Oftentimes you find yourselves being drawn into opportunities to make a contribution by joining a committee and the like. One of the beauties about that collaboration, and besides the fact that you're giving something back to the organization, you get to meet people and you get to work with them. So you begin to see firsthand the uniqueness and individuality of their work style. You get to see firsthand the way they fleshed issues through, how they think about them, how they analyze them. You get to see firsthand how well they collaborate. And you get to see firsthand how well they engage. The beauty about that, these types of interactions are not rehearsed. They are what they are. So what you see largely can be what you get. But I do believe that's a very good approach that would be worth considering in terms of creating and formulating new business associations that could possibly evolve into a collaborative relationship. And that would be my response to that.
Excellent. Okay, that was the end of our questions, and we're coming up to end of time, so we just have a couple more slides to bring you some upcoming events that the FMCC is putting on. Daniel, if you could go to the next slide for me, please.
Okay.
There we go. We have some slides here showing some upcoming webinars. January, FMCC has been working very hard. They're having actually 3 webinars in January to start off the new year. Mark Sakula is going to be presenting Managing the Building Life Cycle with Sustainability Facility Management on January 8th. January 22nd, Ryan Darnell is going to be presenting Wax On, Wax Off, Balancing Innovation and Operations in the United Arab Emirates, FM market. And then also the FMCC Board and STAG is going to be doing a New Year panel 2015 to tell you about what they are up to. Daniel, if you go to the next slide, please. And we'll just show a few more of what the FMCC has coming up. You can see they've been very busy lining up speakers for future webinars. The next slide. And the next slide. There we go. So you can see how busy they have been. Okay, and we have just a couple more slides. In FMCC, we just want to let you know that there are other councils out there that Daniel even referenced during his presentation. If you go to the next slide, he mentioned the Academic Facility Council, etc. So the FMCC does just want to make you aware of other resources that IFMA does have for you in regards to councils. And one more, we have the last slide. I just want to thank you all for joining us today. Daniel for presenting and FMCC for putting this on. And everyone have a great day and enjoy the end of the year holidays. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.